When we hear reports of how we've treated God's creation, we realise what a disposable, temporary world that we have become. Perhaps that's why we're finding it such a challenge these days when our consumerism is being curtailed. We're evaluating what to get and how to go back to basics and what that might look like. And perhaps relearning to appreciate what we really have. Sometimes we can be tempted to treat people as disposable commodities too, dipping in and out of each other's lives when it suits us. We've seen some of the selfishness of that disposable grace in the selfishness of stockpiling in the days running up to this lockdown period. When as Christians we hear the word grace, we might assume that it's all about God's relationship with us through Jesus. The word grace doesn't really appear in the Old Testament before Jesus. It's a post-Easter word. After the infant Jesus was presented at the temple by his parents, we hear that the grace of God rested upon Jesus. This same grace of God became available to every believer through the work of Jesus at Easter. You might be familiar with the acronym God's riches at Christ's expense. God intends us to use that same grace that we are afforded by him in our dealings with each other. He doesn't want us to treat each other as if we were a disposable commodity. God doesn't intend us to treat each other with disposable grace, anchored in self. He encourages us to generate strong grace, anchored in Christ. Grace that helps us to see others as Jesus sees them. Jesus demonstrated what that strong grace looks like when he washed his disciples' feet at the Last Supper. It was an unpleasant job to do and would normally have been performed as the duty of the servant of the house. But on this occasion it wasn't done by anybody, nobody volunteered. And so Jesus did. When it comes to Peter's turn for his feet to be washed by Jesus, he'd seen all of the other disciples go through this process, and he objects. He knows that he isn't worthy of the grace that Jesus is showing him. And he asks that not only his feet be washed, but his head and his hands also needed to be cleansed and made worthy. And Jesus responds by saying that someone who is already clean from being bathed only needs the debris of the day washing from their feet. You see, Peter already knew that Jesus was the Christ. He was the first disciple who had declared it. What he needed now was to develop and to grow this strong grace that would be anchored in Christ, and that would support him in the next part of his journey. He needed to recognise that strong grace would allow him to come daily to Jesus for forgiveness, for cleansing from all that the day had brought. During our daily walk with Jesus, being holy and clean doesn't always come naturally to us. Things creep in. We've already been offered full forgiveness by Jesus' sacrifice in our place, something that we will remember tomorrow. But we need to walk strong in strong grace and come daily to be cleansed of all the debris that day has brought to us, forgiven of all the things that we might have done or might have thought that have made us fall short of all that God intends us to be. We know that when we have sought forgiveness for ourselves, we are in a far better position to afford the same forgiveness to others who may have wronged us. Jesus reminded the disciples in John chapter 13 when he had washed their feet, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." And so our challenge today is to look at our own lives first. Are we clean? Are we being washed by Jesus? And then to wonder in these days of Holy Week reflection, is there something that we should be doing? Is there someone that we need to show that humility of Christ to and offer that foot-washing grace of forgiveness towards them? In humility, we saw in this act of foot-washing Jesus made the first move, and he encourages us to do likewise.